thank you very much for organizing this conference, and I want to greet all our members, dear friends, David and Patrick, and I want to thank them also for contributing this project. After these interesting presentations, I will be very brief and I will leave space for questions and answers about Georgian wine industry in general, because we talked a lot about the history, but we can talk also about modern era, which I think that is quite promising and is also very important for Georgia's economy in general. And of course, it plays important role to country's branding. And it was always our idea that it's a wine country, that every Georgian strongly believed in the country, that it's a wine country, it's a homeland of wine. But of course, we needed more scientific proofs and evidence, which we have presented during today's presentation and conference. But it's not only about, archaeology or biomolecular archaeology or biobotany or whatever. And we will, of course, can talk, which is very interesting. But it's about ethnography, culture, and history, and everything linked and related to wine in the country. It's very important for us. And then it was an idea to communicate to the rest of the world that we are the wine country. Of course, initially we had this discussion with David Lord-Kipanidze that we had the same approach and same understanding that this project was contributing the history of winemaking in general, rather than for our country only, because I think that this project is still financed from our budget, and it will be continued and will be still funded from our side, because there are a lot of things that can be done and can be investigated by this group of scientists, and we can probably engage some other colleagues as well. That is overall very interesting and is contributing the history of winemaking, which is a great culture in general, of course. But I would emphasize the uniqueness of Georgian winemaking and wine culture. There are three different things that make Georgian wine unique. One is, of course, this great history and like millennia history. Either it is the oldest or one of the oldest, it doesn't matter, because we know that there is an uninterrupted history of winemaking in a country. And of course, one of our inspirations was recognition by UNESCO, Qvevri winemaking as an intangible heritage of mankind. That was also the inspiration for launching this project initially. The second is that we do mostly our wines from indigenous, very special varieties, and these are Georgian varieties, and we have biggest biodiversity in terms of Vitis vinifera, grape varietals. It's more than 500, we know. And that's why Georgian wines can be unique and different, because we don't focus on international varietals. And of course, method of winemaking, which is so-called skin contact, like fermentation of wines in Qvevri, which is also special and different, and which is actually recognized by UNESCO as special cultural heritage, I would say. Now, when we talk about wine, is of course is important part of our agriculture, but we of course have to understand that this is part of the culture in general. And agriculture, it was always like our idea that wine itself could not be invented in this place or in this area. It is of course developed in parallel with other activities, how actually humans started cultivation of land and started agriculture, and then of course they came to great invention, which is wine, of course. So we wanted to contribute, we wanted to have our communication based on science. That was the primary idea, Mamuka, and that's why we decided to launch this project. And I want to thank every participant, every scientist who took part and who contributed this project, especially David Lord-Kipanidze, who was scientific director of the project, and David Magradze, who will be next speaker, who was organizing an amazing contributor to this project and still is holding this information and coordinating all these activities. But why we actually needed this? We should base our communication on something, and of course we need because this is very strong driver of our agriculture and economy. Many thousand people are engaged in wine production in Georgia. We understand that there are many thousand farmers doing grapes, and also many hundred companies nowadays producing wines. And we know that almost every family in Georgia, they family does its own wine. So it is the country about wine, all about wine. Now we had to communicate to the rest of the world, and of course this scientific part would be very important in branding of our country as a wine country. It is my belief. Now regarding industry perspective, I would say that it is emerging. It is in a very interesting recovery stage. We had very important past, but it was mostly we had great development in winemaking. Of course, in addition to history, we had modern, 20th century winemaking, which was quite strong. Of course, affected by Soviet influence, and where like quantity was very important and so on. But this is a sector where we have professional resources, and we always like maintain big traditions. It's about education. We had like Ikaltu Academy in 11th century. Actually, this was academy where they had faculty for winemaking, the special one. Wine, you can understand that winemaking as an engineering or high education is considered only in 19th and 20th century in other countries of the world. So in the beginning of 2000, we had a very strong school of winemakers and scientists in winemaking, and also grape growing and agronomy, of course, we understand. So these are the things that make Georgian wine industry strong. But now we have to modern and competitive. To be modern and competitive, of course, we needed investments, and of course, Georgia suffered in general of civil war, internal conflicts, economic problems, and so on. And so we had to focus and intervene, we as a state, the government, to help private sector to recover. And this was our policy. And this is in general our approach in agriculture, where again, winemaking plays an important role, but we started our interventions. First of all, we declared agriculture and agri-food industry as a priority for Georgian economic growth. And of course, special focus on agriculture, on winemaking. Three things are needed to develop agriculture in general, and of course wine sector as well. This is of course we have to settle land registration and land titling, because we privatized land. There was no tracing, there was no land market development, and so on. In order to boost production, in horticulture in general, you need to have land where you develop your orchards or vineyards, right? So we started with together with the World Bank, registering land, giving titles, and developing land market, agricultural land market in general. Now we are in the phase of systemic registration, tracing farmers and tracing agricultural land plots. Of course, we have a lot of issues like land parcelization and so on. I will not go into details and deeply in that direction. Then for development, you need public infrastructure, and this is the responsibility of the state, of any government. For example, we need irrigation, proper roads, we need proper land amelioration, and of course public services, which are part of public infrastructure. This is laboratory quality control, sanitary or phytosanitary measures, which are introduced and established by the state. A lot of things that should be done by the states, and these institutions should be built, and this is second important direction. And the third one, and probably the most important, helping private sector to emerge in this process. They need investments. They need investments to modernize their production, to make them competitive, and for that they need, of course, access to finance, access to technologies, and access to knowledge. And there, with different co-financing schemes, we developed like special programs for different value chains, including wine industry. And we can just like few examples that can demonstrate progress last several years. By 2012, we had around 20 to 50 companies, I mean, registered in National Wine Agency, which is a public body part of the ministry, and our total industrial production like was 50,000 metric tons of grapes. Nowadays, we have around 1,000 small, medium, and large scale, but relatively large scale. Of course, we understand the Georgian companies, wine companies, they are not internationally large scale, but for Georgian scale, they are big ones. Around 1,000 wineries are registered. They do regular reporting. They participate in harvest, and they make wine, and around 300 out of them are exporters. So this is already significant industry. And if you consider these existing wineries who we are leaders of wine industry, all of them are modernized with new facilities, and we understand that with new facilities, with great focus on hospitality industry, which is quite damaged this moment, but that can recover, of course, I'm pretty sure. All of them have tasting facilities like hospitality part, and they are all involved in wine tourism or rural or agricultural tourism industry. And about vineyards, commercial vineyards, we had around 30,000 hectares, and nowadays we have about 55,000 hectares. So we started this recovery like in vineyards and in wine production. But diversity is another point which I would like to present. That we are proud of having around 500 indigenous Vitis vinifera varietals, but we all know that great focus was on 3-4 commercial varietals in Soviet past, and even during independence in early 90s or early 2000, we had focus only on 3-4-5 commercial varietals. Nowadays, like there is this is a trend all over the country that they started cultivation and plantation of all varietals which are indigenous to that particular region or place, and that is a great diversity. But I would say this is a big strength for Georgian wine in general.
Okay, thank you, Levan, for this overview. Some interesting points you mentioned. I'm glad to hear that effort to titling and land. This is a pretext and a preview for also more privatization of land, to more lands moving to private hands for development, and hopefully this will affect wine industry as well, in a sense that there will be more lands moving to under the grape wine development as well, in particular in some of the areas that are mountainous areas, which very specific microclimate with specific like Racha and Lichumi and Imereti mountains and some other places, with a great interest now by wine industry and wine consumers here in this country to some of the rare grape varietals. One question, I mean, we all know that Georgia has exported significant amount of wine last several years. It was going on the upward sort of the trajectory. One of the, I think, as I remember, we're in the top 15 countries exporters of wine in terms of volumes of export. If not 15, then 20. But still, there is an issue with diversification of markets. Obviously, a lot of this wine still goes to Russia and former Soviet Union countries. What are the efforts that wine agency and your government is making towards diversification of the markets?
Yes, you will have later on presentation about economics, and yes, it's important for economy as well, because for a small tiny country like Georgia, wine export, including brandy, which is produced also from grapes, and this is similar to the same industry. it's more than 300 million US dollar exports from the country. And in terms of volume, that is growing every year. Every year we maintain 10% growing at least, and I think that this is significant. We hope that we can recover our position once these COVID-19 challenges are over, but still quite big challenges. I mean, dependence on one single market, which is Russian market. We made a lot of effort to diversify our export sales, and we spend a lot of money and effort to create awareness of Georgian wines in other markets. We all understand that biggest issue is to create awareness, because we understand that Georgian wines are demanded because of like 100+ years awareness among Russian consumers. That is why if there is no artificial ban, almost half of Georgian wines are sold to that particular market, and that is also natural for many traditional winemaking countries. I want to emphasize, like for example, France is selling mostly to Netherlands and UK. Italy is mostly selling to Germany and United States. Like if you eliminate that one or two markets, then you lose like around 70% of export sales for even leading wine producing countries, and we all know that these wines are well known everywhere in the world. So for small country like Georgia, it's challenging, but it's also promising, I would say, because we have targeted marketing campaigns. These are regular communications with consumers. Mostly we have our professional wine writers and wine media engaged in the process, and we identified certain target markets, including the United States, which is one of the target markets for us, because we understand it's one of the largest importer and the biggest market. At the same time, it is quite open, not as conservative as other markets. And we see a trend for millennial generation. They like to try something new. And Mamuka, thank you for your personal, contribution, bringing Georgian wines to the United States and to contribute this awareness process. UK is another market. We have Eastern Europe. We have relatively good awareness about Georgian wines, and overall there is a loyal attitude from that population, for example, Poland and Baltics, and of course we also consider Southeastern Asia, which is a fast-growing market, and where there is a growth trend. You can always enter in the delta rather than taking share of when market is shrinking, in Western Europe, in continental Europe. We understand that there is a tough competition, but I can say that nowadays Georgian wines are regularly sold in more than 40 countries, 45 countries in general. So of course quantities are relatively small, but the wine sales are growing in that market. So we are establishing our position and growing. That is important. And top 10 markets are very important. These are of course Russia, Ukraine, like Soviet space, but now China is on third place and is growing, and we see that the United States is also growing very, very much. So this is promising trend.
I think it's very essential. I know that you understand this issue very well, but just for the sake of audience, Georgia is competing with many other producing countries around the world who try to promote their wines to U.S. market, and in this competition, support from the government is essential, particularly towards the establishing the Georgian wine as a category on the U.S. market. So government investments in that process, I think, is justified. Of course, there are always sort of discussion whether government should be somehow helping private sector or not, and in terms of opportunity cost of government spending in different projects and different fields. But I think this monies is well spent, in my opinion, because of the right approach to it. I think, as I mentioned, wine, at least in the case of United States, is not just bringing another product on U.S. market, but also it brings awareness about the country. It brings about interest towards country. It increases potential travelers to country and so forth. So there's a definitely benefit of these investments, and this is absolutely essential. You mentioned earlier that there is another support that comes to another support project that comes to private sector is supporting financing of particular new wineries and startup wineries. Is this program going to continue? Is it still intact, and is it going to continue, or are we facing any issues with that, with the COVID situation and lack of funding?
Yeah, well, of course, COVID is bringing pressure on any governmental spending. A lot of social topics are raised, but we understand. But still, we have not suspended any of our development projects because we understand, because these are investments for future. So we are losing time if we stop with this kind of investments. Of course, we mostly co-finance like fixed assets for new companies, so that they are more competitive and they are modernized. And there are different ways of co-financing. These are matching grants for startups, for small-scale wine companies, or small-scale wineries or family wineries who want to modernize their facilities. And we know that all Georgian families, especially in major winemaking regions like Kakheti, they have the Marani, which is their winery, and they need to modernize because they were part of this rural tourism boom in the country, which is really very important. And I agree, Mamuka, that the wine is not only wine, because it is contributing awareness raising of a country itself, and also tourism, which was a very important part of our economy. And rural tourism especially is very important. So we are helping that kind of new initiatives from private sector, private individuals. At the same time, we are helping also industrial companies to modernize their facilities. When they invest, they can have access to preferential loans where the state finances interest rate, and it's up to 11%. We understand we have high interest rates in Georgia, and their co-financing of interest rate is crucial. So these loans are really cheap, and this money can be used in development of wine companies and modernizing wine companies, also for startups and new companies. At the same time, we understand that we need more quality vineyards, and even now we have certain restrictions on certain varietals where we see excess production. In general, for rare varieties, we have also financing for establishing new vineyards.
So the relatively rare varietals will have more support than let's say traditional Katsiteli or Saperavi.
That's right.
Okay. I think it's essential. Another essential question is that you touched it briefly, but didn't go deeper in this. I mean, major issues for the smaller producers is obviously to sell their wines, commoditize it, bottle it, particularly smaller quality producers, and more people are doing it. But then, how to market it? This is obviously a bigger challenge, and there are lots of activities from government side as well to facilitate sales, particularly through some of the target markets via certain marketing efforts that wine agencies is funding. But there is another side of it as well. I mean, Georgian production side, and you mentioned about parcels of land that are relatively smaller, and for smaller producers to commoditize their products is more difficult. So I know it's a difficult question, and with the Soviet past, we don't want to do any cooperative efforts of different producers. But are there any any plans in that direction when the different producers, smaller ones, could come up together and do maybe some things together like it's done in Italy or some other countries?
Very frankly speaking, Mamuka, it's not easy process. It takes some time. In 2013, we introduced new legislation for agricultural cooperatives, giving certain incentives for producers, organizations, and producers unions. For many reasons, we all understand they need economy of scale and they should be more competitive. And of course, we started also to incentivize to cooperate and to be part of these unions because these small land plots and like small family farms, this is an issue. It takes some time until this gets popular, but we see that there are several already well-established and good cooperatives, not big scale, but agriculture takes time. When there is a good example that is copied, and then like other farmers will crowd. I believe that this is future for smallholders. I see enthusiasm in different regions, not industrial Kakheti, where relatively easier to sell their wines to big companies. At the same time, this rural tourism is booming, and they do their family facilities to invite guests, and that is helping their sales. Nowadays, they are in a difficult situation with this COVID-19. But in other regions, like Kremokarte, for example, these producers established their own appellation, Bolnisi. It is like PDO. They established their producers association and union. They trace their production, and they cooperate very well. They have even umbrella brand, which is like a good contribution from industrial company Teliani Valley, by the way, who helped them to arrange this and labeling, in bottling, in packaging. And it was a good, example of cooperation of big companies and smallholders. And I think that these examples can multiply in the near future.
This is very interesting because David, in his presentation, gave us beautiful pictures of newly opened Bolnisi Museum. And I think, and he just opened another museum in Wani, and we know in several regions of Georgia have very interesting, I think probably next step is to collaborate, to establish collaboration between wine producers and museums, and do the tastings there and the events and activities, both for educational purposes, but also for marketing purposes as well.
We are ready.
Yeah.
We always said we've always said with David that wine culture is the culture, is a part of the culture. So there should be great points of cooperation. There will be, of course, this cooperation.
Yeah, we have exhausted. We have 1 minute left before your time was allocated. I mean, for your time, Levan, with us. But is there anything like at the end you want to say that in your opinion, you have audience of some of the audience, live audience who are watching now, but there is an audience who will watching this video going forward, and this will be used as a resource for both educational purposes, but also for promotional purposes going forward. So anything that you want to say to our audience?
Well, I want to thank everyone who is following this presentation, this conference, Mamuka, because that means that they are interested in Georgian wine. So first of all, I want to thank everyone. And at the same time, I want to ask them to dare and taste Georgian wine, because that's already like touching this culture. And I think that if they do this, if they dare and make first step, they will love it. Tasting Georgian wine is like touching Georgian culture, which I think that is very interesting. I hope at the same time that the end of this year, we all will be luckier to have ability to travel, to restore travel, and to experience, Georgian hospitality. I want to invite once borders are open, flights are established, those who are Georgian wine lovers and supporters to visit our country. So, Luka, thank you for a nice conference, and I want to thank all participants who follow us.
Thank you. Now we have, let's thank you, Levan, and we'll definitely keep our conversation going and our collaboration going. And we'll hopefully, by the way, for your information and for the information of our audience, we're supposed to have this conference in person at the UC Davis in California, at Mandavis Center there. Unfortunately, because of circumstances, we are doing it online, but next year we hope to have this in person, same place in UC Davis. Best educational facility, one of the best definitely in the world in terms of wine, also with a great collection of Georgian wine varietals there, and just in general, a great place to do conference like this for both educational as well as marketing purposes. So I invite you for that, for the next year's conference, and to all of our participants as well to take into consideration that November next year, we always do these conferences around these dates, closer to the date when this first publication about 8,000 years history of Georgian wine was made in 2017, November 13. So keep these dates in mind, Levan, for yourself as well, and hopefully you will visit next year.